Today is a really cool day. I have an interview with the SABC to talk about my upcoming surgery and general access to gender-affirming healthcare in South Africa. Let's do this. A friend of mine reached out to me. We had met back in the day when I was first kind of trying to figure myself out and when I first came out. And they're now working as a journalist at the SABC and kind of got in touch. And they are doing a sort of story around access to gender-affirming healthcare in South Africa. And now we're going to shoot at a coffee shop. Yeah, this is going to be a dope day. Hi, how are we? I'm sorry, I'm late. I'm so late. So trans people have existed forever, and it's only in recent years, I think, with the rise of universal human rights that we've recognized that gender identity forms one of those, I guess, integral human rights. And so with that framework comes the understanding that trans people need specific protections because of the vulnerabilities that they currently face in society. Within the context of that, trans people have been around. It is only now that we're gaining visibility. It is only now that we're gaining legal protection in a very specific way. And so it seems as though, trans people have sprouted out of the ground and we're just, we've appeared out of nowhere. But we have been here. There are cultures all around the world who have had the equivalent of trans people, although the language might have not existed because English is English. But there have been trans people in cultures all around the world. There have been cultures where there have been people with two-spirit. There have been cultures around the world where people have recognized that there are functions and roles within society that don't necessarily strictly fall within these very distinct parameters of how we define the roles for men and women. And so what we're seeing now is a kind of giving life to those universal human rights, and specifically in relation to gender identity. Wow, do I have to confess my crimes? I don't want to go to jail. It's one of the things that made things difficult for me specifically, and in a lot of trans people that I have spoken to, or queer people that I have spoken to, there is this notion about language. And for me, acquiring the words and the language to articulate how I felt about myself and how I understood myself was absolutely critical. And so for particularly young people, that language plays a vital role in how they understand themselves. And so if we can incorporate queer lexicon into how we are framing ourselves, how we are understanding ourselves, I think that's going to assist young people in understanding their gender identity, understanding their sexual orientation, understanding their expression in a number of ways. And so specifically for trans youth, it is sometimes a difficult process because society and the structures that exist currently don't fully support trans people and specifically trans youth, and that can be a very difficult process. So trans youth need support from their parents, they need support from their teachers, they need support from their caregivers in a very, very particular type of way. So as a general rule of thumb, accessing healthcare in this country is already a problem. We all know this. If you're trans in this country, accessing gender-affirming healthcare is even more difficult. So in this country, there are 2 state-run institutions only in the country that provide gender-affirming healthcare to trans people. We say this all the time, that hormone therapy saves lives. It is really a life-saving intervention. The global lifespan of a trans woman of color is 35 years old. I am 33 now, so I technically, on statistical average, should be dead in 2 years. And so this comes as a consequence of a society, comes as a consequence of a system that does not support trans people nowhere near to the level that they need to be supported. Oh, it's toasty. I'm so we were chilling there in the shade. Yeah, I mean, just I think for me, because I occupy a particular level of privilege in my kind of day-to-day living, so I am a person of color, but I'm also not black. I am a queer transgender woman, but I'm also a queer transgender woman of particular economic means. And so that position I have been able to leverage in a particular way to get particular services delivered to me. Also, the fact that I have a public platform also assists me in kind of, I guess, garnering support in that kind of way. But for the vast majority of trans people in this country, they are unable to do that. So what does access to gender-affirming healthcare and what does access to services look like for the poor, rural, trans, lesbian, black woman living in a township? So currently for trans people, the big stumbling block in terms of access to legal gender recognition is the alteration of Sex Descriptor and Sex Status Act 49 of 2003, or Act 49 for short. Effectively, for trans people to prove their identity, for them to say who they are, they need to medically substantiate the identity before the government will allow them to amend their gender markers on their IDs, which is all kinds of problematic, that is not based in any kind of human rights framework at all. And so that is the bit of legislation that needs to change. Now, there have been a number of moves that have been made from advocacy organizations all over the country that have been working diligently to amend that legislation. One of the things that we know that the Department of Home Affairs has done is that they've published a policy in which they are addressing some of these concerns around Act 49 to do away with the medical requirements of the Act. So to bring Act 49 more in line with a human rights-based framework as opposed to relying on a framework that is pathologizing of trans people and trans identities. And so that policy by the DHA is something that is currently being worked on. Feedback has been provided, it has gone out for public consultation already. And so we're kind of at a point now where we're waiting feedback on an outcome of that policy so the DHA can then implement that policy and then subsequently amend the legislation, amend their SOPs if they need to bring their processes into a space that is more inclusive for trans and non-binary people. One of the things that that policy then also makes room for is the addition of an X marker on the ID, which is a non-descriptor. So if you as a citizen don't want your gender identity displayed on your ID, you can go to the Department of Home Affairs and say, I don't want my gender displayed on my ID, I want an X displayed there. So that gives us room and scope for non-binary and I guess genderqueer identities to also be included in the sort of national framework of the Department of Home Affairs' legislation and policies. I think there are also gaps in our schooling system as it specifically pertains to sexual orientation and gender identity. I think the default position is to assume that everybody is cisgender and everybody is straight. And so suddenly all the queer kids are left falling through these gaping holes in the curriculum. And this not just for, I guess, queer youth, but also for educators who are working in that space, right? So one of the things that needs to be shifted in terms of the training of our educators is a very specific focus on gender identity and sexual orientation. We know that these two things are fundamentally one of the lenses through which we completely experience the world. And so if you can't even acknowledge that somebody's experience is different, how are you ever supposed to, I guess, provide them with the right information and contextualize that information in an educational context? While gender identity and sexual orientation is to a certain degree included in the school curriculum, it is nowhere nearly sufficient for queer youth to be able to be provided with a comprehensive education around that. And not just for queer youth, for everyone as well. We talk about this notion around, that education in a particular context, particularly around sex ed, should be split between girls and boys. And that is a fundamental problem in the way that we think about things, that we compartmentalize these experiences of different people and say this kind of experience is only exclusive for a particular group of people and this kind of experience is only exclusive to you. And so what that starts creating is this notion about separation between particular groups. So separation between genders. If we had the same kind of conversation, and we said, okay, if we're going to separate the black kids from the white kids, and we're going to give the black kids a particular type of education and the white kids a particular type of education, we would be having a very, very different conversation. But again, we don't apply that same kind of logic to gender, and we don't apply that same kind of logic to sexual orientation. So this notion that queer education sits separately from straight education is a fallacy. We have to be inclusive with our education, inclusive with our language, and inclusive with our approaches. As educators, we owe a responsibility to our youth. We owe a responsibility to children to nurture them, to take care of them, and to provide an education for them that is actually going to prepare them when they go out into the world one day. Yeah, get all of it. Woo. Why do I look like I feel like I'm dripping? Good luck with the rest of the shooting and stuff. Who else do you have? You're gonna have good content. You're gonna have you have the right people also. So, thank you. Okay, it is 30 degrees in Cape Town, and I was being lit by natural light, which is to say that I have been sitting in the direct sun for the last hour and a half. Like, the sweat is running everywhere, and I have been filmed for national television. So I'm going on the SABC on national television sweaty. Okay, I hope that interview was helpful in some kind of way and brought you a little bit of value. As always, if you've been enjoying this content, please remember to hit that subscribe button and turn the bell on for notifications to stay in the loop for upcoming videos. And I'll see all of you in the next one. Ciao.